Send. Yan. Okay. So yun. So good evening to everyone. So actually, we're happy na aside from the three of us, there are some people who joined. So I know some of you. So thank you for joining us. So okay, let's start lang. So we're recording. So to let everyone know, so again, we're recording and then we will be uploading the video to Photography Chismis for people to be able to view it, yung mga hindi nakasama. And then aside from that, yun then it's our way also to promote the discourse. So ideally people can join in, pero since not everyone is free tonight, tapos pwede naman silang pwede nilang panoorin doon sa Photography Chismis. And then aside from that, yun. So yun, sige, let's start na. So ito lang, I'll just give an intro. So why are we here? So in the last 5 years, there has been a growing presence of photography in spaces that are usually associated with art making. So most noticeable, of course, would be the 2018 art fair. So Sir AG wrote something about it. So I think it's one of the more credible writings about the ArtFairPH 2018. So Sir AG is a writer. He's a critic. He's a teacher. So he's also a practitioner. So he wrote something about the ArtFairPH 2018. You can look it up if you want. So yun. So that based on what is written. So in 2018, ArtFairPH dedicated an entire tour about photography as art. And while the documented presence of the medium in Philippine galleries goes as far back as 1967, which is contemporary. So that's the exhibit of the 5 photographers sa Gallery Indigo, yung kay Ben Cab. Much of the attempt to legitimize photography as art has been cursory or short-lived, meaning nababanggit siya once in a while, pero ang nangyayari is, although there's an effort, hindi siya naglalast. So medyo cursory siya. While several texts and experts could be cited to support the idea of creative artistic expression being gestured individually or nationally in the past, acceptance of photography as a legitimate art in the Philippine context is still elusive. I think even my students would argue, some of them would argue that photography is not art, and it's interesting. So anyway, so tonight we tried to talk about the National Artist Award as a possible site of legitimization. So that's the reason why we chose the National Artist Award, because it's related to the legitimization of the concept of photography as art in the Philippines. So that's basically it. And we are also going to take into account the political, ideological, and academic particularities embedded in the discourse. So again, thank you for joining us tonight for episode 1 of the Marites Talks Kwentuhan session about Philippine photography. So to start with, so yan. So we have AG De Mesa and we have Stephanie Frondoso for our discussants. Pero again, this is a kwentuhan session, so it's more informal. For those who are participating in the kwentuhan, you can put your comments or questions in the chat box. So para we can also have a lively discussion. So this is not a lecture class. So medyo free for all, pero we're going to try to put some order para maganda yung discussion, tsaka may structure siya. So the first question, Steph and Sir AG, Miss Steph and Sir AG. So in the first place, is photography art in the Philippine context? So yun, siguro ladies first. So si Steph.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Ladies first.
You started the question with, is photography even art?
Context.
And in the Philippine context. So my stand is yes. And that is because the act of making a photograph is a creative process. This is what separates humans from animals. And I think that's the definition of art. So it doesn't matter where in the world this is practiced, it's art. So when you say considered art in the Philippines, the real question there is by whom? In terms of the gallery system and maybe the museums, which is where art is traded most of the time, I would also say yes, because I've been attending many gallery shows this month, last month. All of them have photography exhibits. The show that opened today at Silver Lens is a cyanotype show by Corinne de San Jose. Ongoing at Gravity Art Space is also one of the photographers who were at Photomoto. And also a few of our photographers is in the massive Southeast Asian photography survey in Singapore. They included Filipino artists like Wawi Navarroza, Poklong Anading, and online Kiri Dalena and VJ Villafranca. Last month also, Art Informal Gallery had the work of Reina Abella. And before that, photo-based art of Zian Cabanges. So there is a lot of photography in the galleries. And that's why my stand would be yes. How about AG?
Si AG naman.
No, para maiba lang. Para maiba.
Ano to serious kasi?
No, hindi naman, not the seriousness, of course.
Okay.
I jest. I jest. But
Yeah.
it's a question that has been thrown even before I was into this thing. It's this question certainly students throw all the time. And my answer has evolved through the years. Through the years before, I was a staunch defender of it, of course. And there's also numerous times na parang, syempre, somebody with a dissenting opinion, you have to hear it out. Tignan natin, ano ang sasabihin. For my case, I'm now currently where I am in my life. I'm at a point where I don't care. Whether if it's art or not, I'm just concerned with the output, with the product. Whether it's generated, whether it's, as long as it's visual, probably made with a camera. For institution purposes, of course it is, right? For somebody, when you're speaking about economy, syempre, I mean, economia in the sense, hindi economia numbers, pero in the economics of a gallery, syempre, kailangan nila masabi photo is art kasi parang di ba? One of the places where you can view art is a gallery, is the white wall. But at this point, Diyos ko, bakit mo sa akin trabaho mo? Ganun na lang. Kung art yan o hindi, it's not up to me to judge anymore. I should be, since I'm a so-called critic or a writer of photography. But as long as it's image-based, or now the definition sometimes it has to be lens-based. To be honest, I'm not interested with its definition. I'm just so happy that as Steph pointed out, like 10 years ago, wala kang makikitang show. Ngayon, hindi ako makapunta sa mga... Sabi ko, 10 years ago, when I had the energy and the free time to go all of these, di ba? Parang, wala, pa isa-isa lang. Siguro, every quarter, 2-3 lang. Silver Lens, tapos may gagawin something. Tapos, may independent show sa Cubao X. Okay, ganyan. Merong parang painting / na ginawa dito. Ganyan. Ngayon, biruin mo sunod, ako yung walang oras. It's kind of depressing for my case. But again, going back to the original question, as long as I have the material, I'm good. Doesn't matter if it's art, if you define it or others see it as art or not. As long as you have the output, we'll see what we can do with it.
So yun. So maganda yung pinoint out ni both Steph and AG. Siguro balikan ko lang si Steph muna. One of the things that Steph mentioned is the idea of, as long as it's at the basic level. I think this is also shared by some practitioners na at the end of the day, as long as it's creative labor, I mean, there is labor involved in the form of creation. Then sort of that is art at the basic level. That could also mean life in itself. I mean, if you want to be general, life in itself, it's a creative labor and life is art. So that's the parang I think this was also mentioned by Wawi in one of her talks, no? So creative labor. So we are all artists in a way. Pero what distinguishes, for example, siguro yung sinasabi ni AG and also ni Steph would be the idea of legitimization, wherein in the term when we define contextually what is art, it's usually associated not necessarily with creative labor only. It also involves someone recognizing it as art, na parang there's someone saying that yes, that is art. Parang for example, shooting street photography is for us for shooters, we will say that it's creative labor. But there's a specific maybe group of people who saying that's not necessarily art, that could be a hobby, that could be some artistic expression, but unless it gets inside some white wall as white spaces as AG mentioned, probably yun, parang may question mark lagi of that legitimization feature in the discourse. So would you agree? I mean, that's one of my observations. So would you agree with that, Steph? Yung dun sa
I would rather say that there's plenty of art out there that doesn't necessarily end up in the gallery. So that's whether it's created by a kid or someone in a mental institution, which is art brut. They don't necessarily end up in the gallery. And some of it, they fall off art history, the canon of art history. So that also includes photography. There's a lot of photography that falls out of the canon of art history, but lately they've been trying to include all of those, some of those.
So siguro I'll tie that in. So for example, Steph, you're fresh from you came back from Singapore, and in a way, the National Gallery of Singapore is in a position or exercised in a way their legitimization privileges. I don't know if it's a privilege or a responsibility. Regardless, in a way, contextually, the National Gallery of Singapore is able to define what is photography in Southeast Asia. And seeing some of the works, most of them have a tag of being art. So would it be possible if you describe siguro certain feature of how, at least sabihin natin regionally and through the eyes of or the lenses of the National Gallery of Singapore, how did they define photography as art, or I mean in the exhibit?
Well, their stand is that photography has changing roles.
Okay.
And for example, it used to be to record portraits of monarchies to show power, but now it's in a gallery. So the role suddenly changed. It's for education. It's for public education. Or photojournalists, they're creating work to bring to light certain issues. Now, if you put that in a gallery, the context changes again. So that is one of the great things about photography. The roles and purposes and functions change. So if you look at it in the context of a national artist, or the National Artist Award is arts and letters, so it includes literature. In a way, photography feeds into literature, especially I think photojournalism. They accompany each other.
So tama rin ba yung pagkaintindi ko? I mean, with the way you described it, for the National Gallery of Singapore, in a way, they didn't burden themselves by saying that photography is art. What they try to do, based on my understanding of what you're saying, is that in a way, parang for them, photography is some sort of a communicative language, in the sense that in the sense that for us, when we talk about English or Filipino, you can construct sentences with English, but also you can use the same sentence, or you can use verse to write poetry, prose, or epics. So in a way, parang in the same light, the way the National Gallery of Singapore contextualized photography is that it started with some sort of ethnographic plus historic applications, and then eventually it became parang yun, parang nagkaroon na ng artistic expression, nagkaroon na ng historical validation, because it becomes a record of our 150 years as in the region. So tama yun, no? Yun yung parang in a way, parang yun yung critical dun sa how the National Gallery of Singapore tried to frame photography.
Yeah, they did not directly address the question of photography is art, because for them it's a given. They just moved further past that already to how. Like even the first photographs taken of the region, which are ambrotypes, it's already arguably that's a very complex art form, even if the goal was to record what was happening in the colonies, or the goal was to record so they could show back to the countries where they came from how the peoples look like and the landscapes look like. Just to produce those ambrotypes is an art form, complex art form that until now people are having difficulty mastering, actually.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So from there, so for example, maganda rin yung idea of the colonial usage. I mean, the colonial history of how photography was practiced or used. So siguro I'll turn over to AG. So for example, AG, one of the things that's critical to what Steph was saying is that creative labor. So similarly, to create something is art in itself. Pero most of your talks, you also discuss about artistic intent, meaning the way I understand when you talk about artistic intent is that it separates creative labor as compared to an idea or expression, and that artistic intent, which is something that can only be derived from a creative agent, and in a way parang merong category of creative labor, and then there's artistic intent. Although they're not necessarily opposition to each other, I think most of your talks discusses artistic intent. So would you like to siguro talk a little bit more on that, because in a way that's how national artists are judged, diba?
Yeah, kasama yun sa criteria ng kasama sa criteria sa national artist. Maybe I guess we can go about it later, but to answer the question for me, what do I mean when I say artistic intent or artistic ambition? Actually, the term I always use is artistic ambition rather than artistic intent. Because somebody necessarily doesn't have artistic intent, but their work can become artistic in nature. Anyway, but ibang usapan yun. But somebody with an artistic ambition, somebody who really wants their work to be art in a space, or their work to become a photo book, to be exhibited, to be displayed, to be consumed as a piece of art. So, I mean, some way or the other, not some way or the other, may mga tao talaga na gusto yung gano'n. And I don't blame them. Go ahead, more power to you. With regard to, and that I think is what pushes photography na, kaya marami talaga nagpupush na art ang photography. Because it goes there. The medium in itself, when Paul Strand explored, photo history AG, recall, when Stiglitz saw Paul Strand's work, straight photography, tama ba ako, Steph? Di ba? And called it straight photography. Ay, pwede pala to. Na ganun lang, kung ano mismo yung kinuhanan ko, yun na yun, art na siya in itself kasi nag-compose ako, inayos ko yung exposure. Tsaka nilagyan ko ng, ito yung gusto kong ipakita. When he was able to form that triangle, when it clicked in Stieglitz's head through the work of Paul Strand, parang, okay, ganun pala yun. So, it's, for photography, quote unquote, that's why it became accepted as art, because it's a mix of, that exactly the labor, the artistic intent, and the message that the message you want to communicate. Now the question becomes, paano kung wala naman akong ambisyon? Gusto ko lang magpicture ng asawa ko maghapon magdamag at saka yung honeymoon namin. You'd never know. Papasok tayo sa
Ready sa props. Yeah.
hindi. Pinag-aaralan ko ulit ngayon to eh. Gusto kong gumawa ng TikTok eh. On one of my favorite photo books. Dude just photograph his honeymoon. For those who don't know, Nobuyoshi Araki's A Sentimental Journey. Diba? Ayan. Nobuyoshi Araki's Sentimental Journey. Winter Journey. Dude photograph his honeymoon. One of the best pieces of photographic work this century or ever. But it's just him and his honeymoon and then death of his wife. So, hindi na like there's so many use cases and how it could be, and that's why I'm always stickler for, kumbaga, kaya tinatawag ako ng dean ko na formalist. Sabi ko, hindi ako formalist. Ayoko ng form alone. Gusto ko lang na nakikita ko ano ba yung nasa trabahong nasa harap ko. I always start from there. Ano yung present sa akin na trabaho? The more that I get to know the work and things I know, the more na madadagdagan yung knowledge ng viewer. And so, let's segue it to the main topic. So when a work becomes recognized as a work done by a national artist, it's a state-imposed award. Sinabi ng Estado ng Pilipinas na, alagad ng sining yung gumawa niyan. Now it adds to the story of that work. Gets? Yun yung sa akin, parang I'm more interested in a narrative or a story of the work and the work itself. How did it affect others? How it's affected the artist. So the National Artist Award, as much as I am opposed to it, but we can get to that later, adds to the narrative of the work. Whatever is done, happened, like, I'm super interested into that. And dun papasok din yung sinasabi nga, the artistic labor, the artistic intent, whether or not there is, difficulty ginawa, kung magkano yung ginastos, kung paano tinignan, paano inubos, kung niyurakan ba siya nung una siyang nakita, kung may nanood ba, kung may tumingin, stuff like that. I'm super interested in the story of the work.
Siguro to add lang para din to our audiences. Yan ng mga kapwa namin, mga chismosa. Yung definition lang of why we have a distinction between creative labor and artistic ambition is that similarly, at least in the Western framework, that in a way parang distinguishes folk art versus fine art. So para doon sa mga interested about distinctions about fine art and folk art, at least in the Western lens. Kasi since in a way parang sila yung nagdetermine on how we define things of what is art. So parang in a way for the West, how they distinguish folk art versus fine art is that in folk art, for example, when someone crafts, parang sa kanila parang folk art, parang when someone makes a clay pot, there's creative labor in the sense that you created something out of clay, a material that's available in the sapa, diba, in the ilog, diba, kumuha ka tapos you make a clay. That's creative labor. Pero how the West has determined, defined it, it's folk art in the sense that it's merong artisanal part, meron siyang communal purpose, but there's just creative labor in the sense na nagput ng effort to make that object. Pero when you go to artistic ambition, sort of parang nangyayari diyan, nagkakatalo yung in a way parang it becomes idealist. So when you go back to the history of philosophy, then since most of the definition of art is within the framework or the domain of aesthetics, which is in a way aesthetics is also a Western construct. In a way, it's a lot of it is idealist. Now, for example, when you imbue an art object meaning, then that is sort of in the head of the people creating the thing and also the interpretation. So that becomes a domain within aesthetics. So when you go, for example, a Western would look at parang sabihin natin yung weaving of indigenous group. That's folk art. That's something that's within the community, but it cannot transcend the community. The value of the work cannot transcend the community. It just lies there. It's there. Unlike for them, fine art is something that is more general, more broad, applicable to nations, nationalities, parang beliefs. That's how they in a way they define what is fine art. So in a way, yun lang distinction para dun sa mga nag-join na parang why is there a parang dichotomy between creative labor and artistic ambition. Yun lang, to give you an idea why that is not necessarily opposition, but there is in a way parang distinction, at least in the Western eyes. So yun yung ano natin para to give you a framework for those who are joining the kwentuhan session. So given that